Welcome to the Mid-Market Edge podcast, where we uncover operational insights for private equity-backed portfolio companies. I'm your host, Kevin Bonfield, and over the last 30 years, I've had the privilege of working with fast-growing entrepreneurial teams, helping them scale, tackle challenges, and seize new opportunities. On this show, we'll talk to industry experts and seasoned leaders who will share practical strategies to drive growth, boost efficiency, and create value in the mid-market. Get ready for an insightful, engaging conversation that dives deep into the real-world issues facing your business.
Hi, I wanted to welcome Mark Blaskovich to the conversation today. I've known Mark, I'm going to ask Mark how long I've known him, but I've known Mark from the time that I was at EDS, and since then Mark has worked at EDS and Wipro and Mindtree, and more recently he started his own company. He's the managing director of Guidemark Group and has been working with mid-market companies that also have global teams that they're working with. So I thought that Mark would be a fantastic person to have this conversation with. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Gee, thanks for having me. This should be a lot of fun. Kevin, always good to see you. Yes, we golly, turn of the century is when we met each other, something like that. Golly.
Can we describe it a different way, please?
Yeah, it's been a while. But, we were, I remember even back at EDS, they were setting up a company called Emphasis, actually purchasing a company and rolling out an outsourcing solution for the large multinational IT firm, EDS. So that's probably when we were first introduced to one another, was way back when that was happening. Yeah.
I think that's right, because that was around the time that I started working doing the what we called it, business workforce and capacity management. I think it was. Yeah, we didn't call it offshoring, but yeah, doing a huge amount of work with Emphasis at that point.
Yeah, and actually, I was working with A.T. Kearney, and we were doing a gig for EDS, doing an evaluation of their offshore application development teams, predominantly in Europe, because they had built up a bunch of different capacities in the UK area around like General Motors and that. And so we were doing a number of evaluations of how that was going and how that might be more, add more efficiencies to that. So that was like the 2.0 version of outsourcing, even that long ago. But now we can start talking about what people are doing today real soon here.
Well, so Mark, given that you've seen this over a range of time, how do you describe the difference between outsourcing and offshoring and building global teams back around the turn of the century? I believe I said that. And today, how do you describe the differences?
Well, first off, I think back then, with the exception of multinational companies, mid-market companies were not really getting into that at the time. They were trying to figure out a way to get into it, but it was the large consultancies and the large multinationals that were actually standing up organizations. So a multinational oil company could be standing up a place back then, or an organization back then. Now that's actually mid-markets are thinking very seriously about that and how they might stand up their organization or at least a team in some offshore place. And of course, back then, India was a big popular one, and Latin America was somewhat popular. Europe seemed rather expensive at the time, several years ago. Now I'm not sure it's as perceived as expensive as the U.S. There's opportunities there and synergies there, especially around certain industries. Certain industries are possibly more interesting to look at in the Europe area than necessarily. So maybe we can get into that, because when you start looking at where you go and what you do there, it's not only just the team, but whether that team has a certain competency beyond just the technical aspects of it.
No, I think that's right. So I mean, when you and I were at EDS, I think one of the challenges was to get started. It was, my perception of it was it had to be fairly functionally specific. It was a call center, or it was help desk, or it was tier one support, right? And you needed to commit a large number of people to the deal. Otherwise, you weren't going to get anybody to be interested in what it was you wanted to do.
Exactly. And, now the world's much flatter to the point where somebody in India, if they have enough bandwidth, can be an independent developer and command near or practically the same price point as somebody in our neighborhood in Dallas Fort Worth. Why not? In other words, if they have the same skill set, if they have the same language components, and if they, why wouldn't they command the same price point that somebody would down the street? So that certainly changed that market entirely from an individual standpoint, and that also forces the price points in those particular offshore markets to be much higher, because they've always had a challenge, at least in India, of course, of people bouncing around from company to company. Less so in Europe, because there were a lot of rules around that, picking up people and letting go of people. But now if there the chance to be an independent developer and join a team is much more possible now than it was certainly 20 years ago, but even 5 to 10 years ago, I would say. Wouldn't you? Have you seen that as well?
No, I would say that that's the case. And my sense is that the people who can do that are the ones that are, number one, the best at what they do, right? Like really, really good people. And then the second is that they're in skill sets that are in high demand. So if you are a really good developer that's leveraging AI these days, I don't think companies care where in the world you live.
Exactly. If you can, manage large language models and do development in that capacity, you're worth a chunk of gold right now. So, and the chance of finding these good individuals is difficult. There's a plethora of people who may claim to have that, but if you can find ones who have really had a lot of experience at that, they command very high dollar right now, obviously. So they'll be hard to find and hard to maintain, hard to keep, as well as hard to you'll have to figure out a way to pay for that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So as you think about that time with EDS, and what do you see as the changes in the industry which have brought us to this point where the mid-market is able to go and dive into these opportunities?
We briefly talked about technology, and of course, the idea of broadband gets you there. But I think that, when we talk about other tool sets, we've really, we've gone through so many different iterations of project management tools and various ways of managing application development teams, from scrums to blah blah blah, and those have also matured in a great way. So it's now gotten to the point where an individual can jump into a team and be effective, whereas before you almost had to teach a person how to act in my team. Now I don't think that's really the case as it was back then. If you see the point there around the sheer way that a team is structured, how it goes through its development cycles, they're much more similar now than they were before. It was basically a waterfall approach back then. But even the maturity of the other teams has really gone a long ways from where it was.
Yeah, so if we talk specifically about developers, right? The fact that you've got more remote teams in the US, right? And that kind of that consistency around using tools like GitHub and Jira and Confluence, right? The kinds of things where, as you're saying, I don't need to be onboarded completely to the team. I can go in and I can see these are the next set of tickets that need to get handled. Oh yeah, I see what that is, right?
Yeah, and companies are much more diverse in terms of their geographical location. The people within companies, it so much more in the past that companies had teams reasonably close together. Several companies I've worked with in the last year or two are extremely diverse, to where we get on Zoom calls with somebody in the West Coast in Oregon, somebody in the Midwest, us down in Dallas Fort Worth, and maybe somebody in the East Coast, and that's almost just standard. It is standard operating procedure. So that's so much unique from what before, and it's reasonably accepted. And so therefore that's just the nature of the business now, and companies have accepted that. So then it's easier to accept maybe an offshoring situation because nobody's in the same room anyway. So why not have somebody in Latin America or somebody in Denmark or someplace like that?
Did you see that when you were working with EDS and Wipro and Mindtree, did you see that as a barrier, that the whole they're in a different place and so we can't be one team together? Was that a barrier? Or
it can be from a cultural perspective for the client. So it depends on the client, right? Yeah, I don't think there's obvious cultural differences between each company and each region, or each country and each region. So I've grown. If you've gone to India 2 or 3 times a year for the last 15 years, you get to know India, and India gets to know you. So we've experienced that and have developed our cultural similarities and understanding of diversity there. But let's talk about clients, because can the client accept that? It's one thing for the consulting firm to put that together and be successful, but does the client accept it? And even this year, I ran into a client that was concerned about offshoring and having somebody offshore do their work. And of course, we've taken technology to the point where we can create virtual machines and leave data on-prem or even in a domestic cloud or something. So there's ways of handling the data so that you're not experiencing some sort of legal problem. But I still find Luddites out there that have to say, well, but that's not right, is it? Why can we do this? So they haven't quite got there yet. There's even some of those, but for the most part, in the larger organizations, or even organizations that have developed this diversity of geography that I spoke about briefly, they tend to be there already, in my opinion. But there's a few out there still. There's also a security issue, and any company that has extremely proprietary information is concerned about bringing in any outsider, whether it's a consultancy or whether it's whether it's an independent person. And so I think that plays a role. So the size of the group that you bring in, you're going to want to develop some sort of understanding and trust with them so that you can actually bring them in, because many companies now they're pushing a more proprietary story. It used to be we were doing fairly standard things in IT. We were running accounting systems, and we were running HR systems and things. So as long as the data didn't get in the wrong hands, so to speak, it was frankly pretty standard business practices. Now, I was working with briefly with a medical clinical testing company that does clinical tests globally for pharmas and universities and things like that, and they had a very proprietary a product, and so while they wanted to leverage offshoring, and that sort of thing, they really had an extremely proprietary product that they didn't want to have sneak out the door at all. So there's that challenge around that I think is actually the negative side of offshoring, or of even bringing in outsiders. It gets to the point of where will you find the safest place for your data and for your team.
So being thoughtful about which parts of the business can be moved to a global team versus which parts you need to hold close. That's interesting, because my recollection in the before times was with the data security and having teams VPN in and manage that way was a way of making sure that the data stayed onshore. That was a concern for a number of clients, but actually having the issue of, I don't want anybody near this for the potential of losing it, right, is something to take into account.
Yeah, and of course there's been there's been some serious data breaches by several companies, and those are now such a big deal now Whereas before there was some basic stuff you didn't want to get out, but now it can be an extreme liability for an organization if their data gets out the door. So this isn't, you oftentimes now have a discussion with the legal team in a pretty big way when you start some sort of either bringing another organization in or going to another country or offshoring. You tend to have a conversation with their legal team as well and go through some pretty big hoops these days versus what you used to do. An NDA is not just all that people do anymore. There's much more to it than that sometimes.
Fair enough. You talked about, you've been to India enough that I forget what your phrase was. You've become part of India, and India has become part of you, or something like that.
Yeah.
That's how do you, from when you first started going and working with teams there, how have you found kind of integrating that either that style or way of working or values or culture? Like, how do you get to the point where you feel like you're part of them and they're part of you?
Yeah, well, first off, you have to assimilate yourself as an American into their culture enough to really understand it. The family to many people over there is extremely important. So you may find somebody who was supposed to meet with you today and they've had a family situation that's critical, and so they won't be able to meet with you today. That's much more prevalent than it is in a Western culture where we tend to suck it up. I think more so. So this being sensitive to that sort of stuff is really important. They also may have several generations, or at least a couple generations in their household, so they have a different lifestyle than we have. They have a different way of getting to and from work than we have. Maybe they have a bus. Maybe they're on a motorcycle. Did they get in an accident in a motorcycle? So there's a lot of different things that happen in that culture than in our culture. So understanding that's really big. And I found that my friends and colleagues in India were really fascinated by our culture. So they were interested in hearing our story and were very open to that. But there's still a trust issue. I don't care if you're talking about India or a Slavic country or a Latin American country or European. You're still going to have to develop a level of trust and collegial camaraderie with whichever group you're in. So understanding that is really the importance of the soft side of developing a successful offshoring experience.
Yeah. You talked about the different countries early on. You mentioned that, that 25 years ago, it really was India, maybe the Philippines, and that was about it. But now it's very much something where you can go to a whole myriad of different countries. As you look at thinking about where to go, what are the kinds of things that you talk to people about in terms of evaluating the location you're going to partner with?
Yeah, so you're going to start with what's this company doing? In other words, what's their what business are they in? And typically there's something special about that particular industry that would potentially could possibly drive you certain directions. I mentioned medical, clinical, pharma companies. Obviously, those or medical device companies, what are those? They might partner more with Germany or somewhere in Europe because that's where there may be people who have more experience with that particular industry. If you're into manufacturing and you may want to find you may be able to go to Mexico or down south because there's been groups who have done that before. So I think the industry plays a role. Some organizations care about time zones. So certainly there's only certain time zones you can work with, and of course if you truly go globally, it's really challenging to have a team in Australia, a team in Europe, and a team in the United States. It's just it's going to be hard to find a time that you can bring all those people together.
Exactly.
So time zones get to be a play in that. And here's an interesting one. I think it's really important to see if that company has any sort of offshore location or even regional location already. For example, if they've got a group already in some country that they're trying to stand up because they have a manufacturing company there or whatever. Let's say you have a manufacturing company in Mexico, or a manufacturing plant in Mexico. Well, now you're going to have to put infrastructure in there anyway. So there may be a way to piggyback what you've got going already, and that way you've eliminated some of the cost associated with it. You may want to stand up a team inside of that facility, and you may have a security opportunity that's less challenging than than someplace else. So understanding what the company's doing plays a big role, not only from an industry perspective, but from their own regional conversations. And if they're looking to expand in India for some reason, and if they're looking to expand in a certain region in India, then maybe that would be a more logical place than just any place in India, because India is a big country now. And so, are you in Mumbai and Pune? Are you in Bangalore? Are you in Hyderabad? Are you in Delhi? Each of these has their own interest levels, and if you happen to be standing up an organization in one of those, then why not try to leverage that as opposed to fight the battle of going someplace new?
Well, and the team, I mean, I think we're talking mostly about developers, testers, that kind of thing. But in that kind of situation, yes, there's a physical proximity, but what you also get is that they feel like they're part of a local team, and they can actually see the way that particular company works.
Yes.
What's going on in my plant operation? So that makes the developers better because they've got a deeper domain expertise.
A very good point. Excellent point. It gets back to the cultural side of things and how you can develop that level of rapport that's so important, as opposed to just having one more developer on your staff, so to speak. Yeah, that's a great point.
So we talked at the beginning about how Guidemark, your company that you lead at the moment, works with mid-market companies. Maybe you can give me an example, or some of the things that you're doing with global teams and your clients at the moment.
Yeah, well, from an AI perspective, AI is the big word these days, and everybody's trying to learn how to do that. And I was sharing with somebody the other day that when COVID came down, I decided I have a bachelor's degree in statistics, so I am kind of a numbers nerd to begin with. And so when I was going through the COVID lockdown, I went off to my wife actually talked me into this. I found a machine learning course, intro to machine learning, so to speak, at Stanford online. So I got a chance to take that and start to understand, 4 or 5 years ago, what the basics are of how machine learning works. And I really wanted to understand that because, it's just like anything else. You and I have been in this business for a number of years, but you don't really get into, if you don't get into some level of nuts and bolts, it's all still too peripheral or ethereal. So I did that. Didn't teach me how to be, a deep developer of anything, but it gave me a chance to understand how, my experiences with vector algebra and all that really played a role in how, you might build a large language model and all that. So then I got connected with a couple AI companies and working with one specific, and jointly we're really trying to bring that idea together. So there's the technology is one side of it, the business solution side is another side of it, and typically those piece parts are juxtaposed, right? And so people like you and I, Kevin, have basically put our career together trying to bring that together. And so that's the role I've been playing, is in an advisory capacity, as well as I guess you'd call it pre-sales, to where if you can talk about, you can develop the understanding of how artificial intelligence might help your organization, and then maybe put together the solution set, or maybe a proof of concept or something to start an organization down a path. Because many organizations are into it right now, but it's still a reasonably immature industry, in my opinion, relative to what we've seen in so many other parts of technology.
Yeah, look at the risk of going down the AI path. It feels to me like there's two pieces which kind of connect to what we're talking about. The first is kind of similarly to offshoring or building a global team, AI requires a fairly consistent process and really good data. Like if I don't have those two, then it's difficult to go down the AI path. I think it's difficult to go down the global teams path as well.
Uh-huh.
Are you seeing something similar, or?
Yeah, exactly. It's always been the challenge of finding data, and there's so much more data now. Data continues to get piled into companies, and now companies are trying to find it. Where is it, and how can I get it to my customer, either my internal customer or my external customer, more quickly? And so that's where artificial intelligence tends to help in that capacity. And it's the tools are getting pretty good now. I mean, to where you can develop some pretty good tool sets for inside an organization reasonably quickly, and prove, at least on a somewhat detailed level, what somebody wants to do. And so examples are obviously a company has a bunch of specification data, and it's going to need to build some sort of a response to a customer for a request for a proposal for a series of items that's going to go together. I was sharing this example a while back, where if you've got a manufacturing company that has a bunch of different components, and these components are all over, a different component might be in Canada, than in California, than in Texas. They all have different SKUs. Which one are you supposed to use? And does your salesperson know which is which? And how might you use artificial intelligence to go in and cull that, and at least pull up the list for this person? And that gets to the point of AI, where the expectation is not that AI is perfect, but it becomes a tool or a help for the person doing the job. It's not a replacement necessarily, and that's the scary part. It may or may not give the answer, but it gives you much more information than you had before, and that's the value of where that would go, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the other place where the two intersect are that if there's a way of actually either accelerating work and making somebody more productive who's already doing the job, right? Or I can eliminate this piece of the work, then I don't necessarily need to move the work somewhere else.
Yeah. It certainly, hopefully, eliminates, if there's a process of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, if it eliminates at least one or two or three of those processes to get to the end point, then that's clearly what we're shooting for. And to the extent that you've got a group that's in a different area, for example, offshore or something, that can be helpful to pull that data together through an AI solution set. So that should be a more helpful thing. But it gets back to the data. You're going to spend a lot of time making sure the data is right from beginning to end, and working on it. And so that's really getting that part down right is really important, and becomes the challenge that I see every organization working on today.
Yeah. So if I was going and building a team today that was offshore, or building a set of different locations, how do I get started in terms of the type of work that you think can be moved outside of the US these days?
Yeah. So, it gets back to the point of, are you looking to offshore technology, or are you looking to offshore processes and business processes? Because you can do both. And so I think there's still opportunities in each of those realms. So you certainly want to go down that path. And then I think you want to look at where you want to expand and leverage your existing team. In other words, are you doing this just for a cost savings? And if that's the case, then that's often a real challenge, because the cost savings is almost not there. You see, the bigger issue is, can you find a way to expand your team and develop a broader team in that particular area? So again, I'm back to the idea that I think it makes much more sense to leverage existing organizations that are doing this for the company, as opposed to having the company do it themselves. Many companies still try to do it themselves, but it's just like anything else. Hire a professional, right? And the challenges associated with keeping, retaining, hiring, training are different in every culture. So it's much better to leverage an a group that's doing that, as opposed to trying to do that on your own. Having said that, there's still organizations that have an interest in doing that, and if they can build a decent sized team there, it makes sense.
Yeah,
1 or 2 people, man, that's going to be a little harder.
Yeah, I think on the lower end, finding a partner to work with, I think gets you started. You do get to a certain size where it makes sense for you to go and have that that captive that you own, but smaller size, getting started doing that through a partner.
Yeah. There's also an interest, and it depends on the region, because some regions won't let you do this as much, but there's an opportunity to do the rent to hire concept. Yeah. So many IT services firms would at least entertain that discussion. Some wouldn't, but I'm back to this idea: if you have certain proprietary information that you're developing, or and skills or technology you're developing, well, then obviously that may be critical to keep within your organization. So a rent to hire type solution set might be a really cool way to do that, and that organization might even be interested in helping you stand up that in that area, or at least to some degree, because partnership is really important these days. So you can't consider the fact. I mean, Kevin, you and I could consider each other as competitors, because we do management consulting, but nonetheless we've been buddies for years, and we find that there's tons of synergies that you can find, and once you find those synergies, chase them and exploit them. So I think that example of working with an organization or a partner, and being clear as to what your strategy is and how your strategy is how they might help you with your strategy. Maybe there's a way to find those synergies, or not. And if there's not, no's a good answer too.
Yeah. No, the point that you made around the point you made around, if you're just doing this for cost savings, it's going to be challenging. If you're looking at this from the perspective of I need access to great talent around the world, or I'm trying to build something that allows me to reduce my cycle time because the work is going to move around the world, depending on time zones. That's a very different conversation. And being clear on which one it is that you're going after when you get started, defining what success looks like feels important.
Yeah, develop and test is a good example. So maybe you're developing in one time zone, you're testing in the next time zone, and that becomes a really positive way of using offshore or using a different skill set that's in a different location. And so whether you have the development or you have the testing, depends on which you happen to be best at.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you were to look back, given everything that you've seen in this, in this space, if you were to look back and you were advising somebody who was coming at this for the first time, what's one thing that you've either done or seen that you would advise either to not do or to absolutely do and do it faster? What's the one big piece of advice you would have?
Well, I think the cost side is the biggest one. Is don't think you're just going to save money. Figure out how it's going to be strategically beneficial for you. So that's possibly the one thing. And then the other thing I think that we've also mentioned is find partners. Don't try to do this alone, because if it's possible, but why try to learn it on your own? So I think those are the two big things I if you were just to say, distill this down to a couple very, very basic points. Those would be the two basic points I'd say.
Yeah, look, I love that second one. There's the great consultant to entrepreneurs, Dan Sullivan, talks about who, not how. These are solved problems, right? And for us, it's a lot faster for us to be able to say, I've found somebody who's already solved this. They can do this for me. I've found the right who rather than working it out myself.
Yeah. But here's the problem. There is a plethora of who's out there that think they can help you. So if you're the customer, you're like, oh golly, now I've got more help than I could possibly ever need or want. So then it gets down to the question of how do you find the best and the one that fits your situation the best. And that's that gets into a totally other discussion here on that. Yeah.
Well, Mark, I wanted to thank you very much. This was fascinating. I didn't think we were going to get into an AI conversation. These days, who knows, right? Thanks very much for your time. I really
appreciate it. I likewise. I live AI, so I'm afraid that's why we get there. But yes, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to work with you, Kevin, and see you. And I hope to see you again real soon. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to the Mid-Market Edge podcast. For more information, visit the Mid-Market Edge website at midmarketedge.com. Details are in the show notes. Remember to subscribe and like the show so you'll never miss an episode. And until next time, keep building your edge in the mid-market.